What that will do is take us next to a presentation from our financial staff with regard to the budget. And this was posted as a work session to take up items related to enterprise funds and CIP. So we will have a direct presentation with regard to that, and then we will open it up for questions and discussion by the council, which can be, of course, free-ranging and not just related to enterprise funds and CIP. Councilmember Velasquez, did you want to say something?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. First, I just wanted to give Carrie Lang and her team a huge thank you. From this dais, last night we had our budget meeting, and Carrie suited up in her armor and came out with us, and always presents with so much grace and brilliance and just kindness about the budget. I think she's an exceptional representation of our city, our values, and what we're trying to get done. And for folks that don't know, and if you haven't had your budget town hall yet, every now in District 3 they can get a little festive, and Carrie remained cool and just delivered, like I said, delivered with grace and a lot of brilliance, and it is very, very much appreciated.
Well, we all appreciate her. Yes.
Thank you, Council Member.
Thank you, Council Member. With that being said, let's see what you do here.
Pressure. Good morning, Council. Mayor, I'm Carrie Lang. I'm the Director of Budget and Organizational Excellence. Today we'll start the conversation with a general fund discussion focusing on fire, and then we'll move forward to our enterprise departments talking through, talking through transportation, public works, watershed protection, and development services, and then talk about some of the next steps. We are here on the 23rd to have this discussion, on the 29th to have this discussion. We do have another work session on Thursday where there will be a public hearing at 3, as well as the council will set the max tax rate. And then there are 2 additional work sessions scheduled for next week, followed by the approval of the budget beginning August 13th. So starting with the general fund, talking about the fire department in particular, a memo was distributed to council on yesterday to discuss the proposed adjustments to the staffing plan for fire. The next 2 slides will highlight some of the challenges that we're trying to address and the goal of this proposed change. The staffing model allows for 25% absenteeism on each shift. That's recognizing that our firefighters have earned leave such as vacation or the need to use sick time, but it also allows for the use of military leave or jury leave or other related leaves that they may have to take. Over the last 5 years, we've seen an increase in the rate of absenteeism and have seen an increase in the leave usage by the firefighters, and as it has gotten as high as 39% in fiscal year 23. It's averaging around at least 36% for the last several years. And so this increase in leave use results in an increase in overtime costs for the department. What we are proposing is to continue the staffing of 5 firefighters for every shift. That is, given that 25% grace of the usage of leave. We are ensuring that the staffing for aerials and rescues continue with 4-person staffing to make sure they continue to operate effectively. And then we are going to continue responding based on the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Agency recommendations. We're actually exceeding those recommendations and will continue to exceed them with the changes. This shift is really talking through no longer backfilling the engines on overtime. And so we will schedule 5 people. We will have 4 people on the engines as long as we stay at that 25% or less absenteeism. When it triggers overtime for the engines, that's when it will go to the minimum staffing of 3. Moving on to our enterprise and CIP departments. We were asked to bring up some information about transportation and public works and their sidewalk reconstruction or construction and rehab program in particular. The department has $8.4 million in their operating budget for sidewalk maintenance and program management. That would include things like vegetation removal, spot repair and replacement, lifting or grinding concrete to remove trip hazards. And there are several projects that they are planning over the next fiscal year for that $8.4 million. In addition to that, they have $34.5 million planned spending in their capital program. That is across the 3 different current bond programs that we have from 2016, 2018, and 2020. And the other resources include things like sidewalk fee in lieu or federal grants that fund some of these capital programs. In fiscal year 26, the plan is to spend $39.3 million. And you can see, $34.5 million is the plan for fiscal year 26. And then it goes down based on the available bond dollars that they anticipate in the out years. For our watershed protection program, they have $24.6 million in their operating budget for floodplain management, as well as $29.3 planned for stormwater infrastructure when we're looking at flood mitigation. About 10% of the land in Austin is in the floodplain and is subject to the dangers of flash flooding. This is only looking at the mitigation efforts that the city is focused on, and it is a major component in the watershed emergency management program. The CIP dollars, they've used most of their CIP dollars over the last several years, and it includes work at Little Walnut Creek, Upper Onion Creek buyouts, and Waller Creek, Bull Creek, and Shoal Creek. The fiscal year, the 2018 bond program is spent down to 84% as of the 3rd quarter of this year. So the remaining spending that you're seeing and the anticipated spending is supported by the Drainage Fund operating transfers. Moving on to development services, there have been several questions about the Development Services Fund and Department, and these next several slides will talk through not just the department's creation and the challenges that they're seeing, but some of the things that they've been doing over the last couple of years and are planned for fiscal year 26 to manage the operations of that department. In 2016, the department transitioned to an enterprise fund, and the goal has always been for the development to pay for itself. So those development functions to pay for itself. That's why it was moved to an enterprise fund. The transition was completed in fiscal year 19. One of the challenges that we've been seeing is how do we continue to balance the fund with while enhancing services, organizing the distribution of those development processes so that we can make sure that it is efficient across the city. And then some of the regulatory and process complexities and complications makes some of the development functions a challenge for the department and for staff. And then finally, some of the technology limitations that we have been addressing over the last couple of years. In fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25, the department started making some major changes to their operations to reduce some of the costs of the fund, including a hiring freeze, as well as releasing 20 full-time vacant positions or transferring those positions to other departments, releasing 16 temporary employees in fiscal year 24. And then moving some of the expedited team, dissolving it and relocating staff, putting some of the staff at the airport for that expansion review team, and then looking at moderate fee increases that were implemented in fiscal year 25. The department plans to continue those efforts in next fiscal year. They've released or transferred 42 additional positions. They're really working on right sizing and making their operations nimble. They're transitioning to more third-party and temporary staffing to allow for adjustments as development ebbs and flows. And then they have been working over the last several months on reviewing their cost model to make sure that their that their fees represent the costs that are that they're seeing in their operations. Some of the things that they are working on and continue to work on is to control costs and focus on core service delivery. They're optimizing their services, so that includes implementing their expedited site plan review, accelerating building plan review timelines, and then really making sure that they're focusing on a customer-centric culture of service. And then we've been working on the technology capabilities, improving those capabilities across the enterprise management system. And this slide finally talks about some of the proposed fee changes. There have been adjustments to a number of fees across the Development Services Department, and this just represents, yes, there are some fees that have increased in the proposed budget, but there are also a number of fees that have decreased through that right sizing. And so the department has continuously worked on adjusting the fees. Over the last several years, we've been working to really correct the model to make sure we are charging at cost of service. There were a couple of years, I believe, that we did not do a cost of service analysis or do a fee increase to represent the true cost. And so you'll see that some of these adjustments seem like larger adjustments because they had not been adjusted in several years. So I'm back at the timeline to talk through some of the next steps. As you all are aware, just a reminder that August 4th, that's next Monday, budget amendments and items from council are due for final compilation, as well as CBQs, so council budget questions. So if you have any remaining council budget questions, we ask that you please provide those to us before or by August 4th so that we can make sure we are able to respond prior to adoption. Staff are continuing to work through those responses to your CBQs and are really working to try to get those out in a timely manner. And with that, I'm open to answering any questions.
Thank you. If you want to ask questions, council members, please sign up here. That way I'll know and I can go in some order. And what we'll do is the same routine that we've been doing, which is I'll call on somebody, let them do a thorough Q&A, and then we'll go to somebody else. But if you're not done, we'll come back to you after the fact. So Councilmember Harper Madison, Councilmember Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it. Thank you, Ms. Lang. I appreciate the presentation. I am relieved to hear that there's some sort of compromise solution to the staffing question for AFD. And so I just wanted to get a better understanding of what the transition looks like. So worst case scenario, we exceed that 25%. What does it look like to transition into three-man staffing if that were to transpire? Good morning, Chief. Chief Byers.
Good morning. Joel G. Baker, Fire Chief, City of Austin Fire Department. Thank you, Councilmember Harper Madison, for the question. What the transition would look like for a three-person staffing on the engine operation. Basically, what we would do is, when needed, when staffing requires, because we don't have enough personnel at work on a certain particular shift, working three shifts, A, B, and C shift, we would not hire overtime to fill the engine. However, if enough personnel come to work, with about 75% of the workforce, then we will have enough personnel to staff each unit with 4 personnel. Keeping in mind the area trucks and quints and the ESD's engine, ESD4 engines, and the rescue unit still will maintain a staffing on the engine of 4 personnel.
Okay. You said ESD and?
ESD4, we have a contract with them.
Right.
And it requires 4-person staffing.
You said ESD4 would maintain 4-person staffing, and then you said another?
ESD4, the rescue units, and the area trucks and the quints.
Thank you. And so, again, back to my original question, worst case scenario, that 75% threshold isn't met and you are having to call in overtime. That's what the transition looks like?
Correct. So
okay.
If the 75% of the personnel are not at work, we would not call in overtime on the engines.
Only on the aerial, the
Only on the-
Quince, and ESD4.
That's correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes.
That answers my question. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. And then, Ms. Lang, I'm moving over.
Councilmember, do you mind if I interrupt?
Not at all.
Chief, I think that's what you're talking about. What Councilmember Harper Madison has done is she's focused in very smartly on what people need to know and don't understand about what it is, what the thinking is behind this proposed change and what the difference is. I think it would be helpful, in answer to her question just then when you said just a certain type of truck, if you would describe the trucks and what is happening to specific, I said trucks, let's say vehicles.
Yeah.
And because I just added to the problem, right?
Absolutely.
Would you please, we all think of fire,
Right.
say we think of a fire truck and we don't think of other things. So would you please walk in detail through the thinking and what happens with each vehicle?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. And you know, my familiarity with the apparatus is I was married into the AFD family for 20 years, and so I'm familiar with the differentiations.
Absolutely.
My apologies to the general public.
No, and my apologies. Thank you.
No, I think you've narrowed in on what the real issue is.
Right.
People need to hear that. So if you would do that.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity to expound more on the equipment. So the area trucks are the long apparatus that carry the ladders for rescue operations, for ventilation purposes, high-rise operation, car extrication, things of that nature. The rescue engines are in our special operation unit, our hazmat team, road rescue team, swiftwater rescue team, things of that nature. Because of their specialty and training, we will maintain 4 personnel on those units. The Quince is similar to an area ladder, long truck, but they also have a pump, like an engine operation. They can do both pump water as well as do ladder operations. The engine itself is a small apparatus, just carry between 500 to 1,000 gallons of water. We have approximately 54 fire stations, 67 pieces of equipment. So it's incumbent that we staff those units versus, again, blacking out, which is the permanent closing of the fire station, or browning out, which is the temporary closing of the fire station or apparatus. My goal here is to keep every fire station open, staffed with personnel. Mm-hmm. By giving me the authority to modify my staffing measures as needed when staffing shortage presents itself, that I'm able to maintain, I'm able to keep all of the fire station apparatus running to respond on calls throughout the city.
Now walk through what happens 4 versus 3 on aerial, rescue, Quince, engine, please.
Absolutely. So what will happen, right now we have a 4 on all the apparatus, on the engines, the trucks, the aerials, the Quince, and the rescue unit. The National Fire
My apologies, Chief. Mr. Mayor, I'm going to interrupt also there because I was a part of the discussion where we made the transition to 4-man staffing. And so
4-person staff.
4-person, correct. Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. And I wonder if that might even be relevant to the general public, why we made the transition and what the implications are of us going back to where we came from, just even during the course of my tenure. That's only 6.5 years.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Madison Harper. The city ordinance was adopted, I believe, December 8th or 9th or 2018. I started serving as the fire chief December 10th. So the city ordinance was adopted prior to my arrival. My belief that one of the reasons went there because of the recommendation for the National Fire Protection Association, and others say they recommend 4-person staffing. Mm-hmm. I'm not advocating to totally change the 4-person staff. What I'm advocating is when staffing does not allow for 4-person staffing, when staffing does not allow for 4-person staffing of the apparatus, to give me an authority to only allow 3-person staffing on the engine. Now, why is that important? Again, NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, 1710, make a recommendation of 4-person staffing, but they also make a recommendation. Let me slow down on this one. They also make a recommendation that for a house fire, two-story wood frame house fire, that you shall send 17 personnel with an area allow, 17 personnel. The Austin Fire Department, we currently send on a house fire approximately 32 personnel. So we exceed the recommendation for the NFPA. If we was to go to a 4 and 3 staffing model, 4 on the trucks and 3 on the engine, we would still exceed the NFPA recommendation. Instead of sending 32 personnel, we would send 24 personnel. Again, NFPA recommends 17, we would send 24 personnel. We would exceed that. However, if we have enough firefighters at work that day, that here at work, we will be able to still send those 32 personnel. The challenge is our leave balance. We have approximately 30 plus members on injury on the job, IOJ, which is significantly down. We have approximately per pay period 400 plus or minus personnel who are on leave, whether it be vacation, exception of vacation, or paid holidays. I have anywhere between 20 to 45 personnel per day on sick leave. Saturday and Sunday, I have about 40 to 50 people on sick leave. And then I have personnel, I don't have the number for, on family leave, military leave, special assignment, training, and that nature, they are on leave. So I have enough bodies. I don't have enough bodies coming to work on those various days to staff the unit with 4 and 4. So the only thing I'm requesting for the city council and from the city manager is to give me an authority to manage my staffing level and maintain still the safety of the firefighters. Because the effective firefighter force is basically how many firefighters that are trained and equipment can we send to respond to emergency. And I submit to you, with the 4 and 3 staffing model, we will have enough firefighters on the scene to mitigate the incident. And when we don't, if we come across we need more personnel, then we can dispatch personnel. We have automatic aid agreement with our surrounding emergency service districts who's willing to help out as we have helped them in the past. Again, I'm not advocating to totally deal away with the 4 and 4 staffing model. I'm just saying I need to make modification as times permit for me to modify the staffing model.
I appreciate that very much. You know, and it made me think about something. I have 3 fire friends who have been, for all intents and purposes, off for like 2 years plus. You know, folks who have long-term COVID, who really ran into a lot of issues with COVID. You know, I know I was listening to Ms. Lang make the presentation around leave use, the increase of leave use. And, you know, and that 2023 threshold is right around when some of the research that I've been doing around sleep deprivation and increases in substance use disorder and mental health disorders. I think that 2023 threshold is where a lot of sectors are finding people really hit the wall from COVID. I honestly don't think that us as a society that we've collectively recognized how much impact COVID had on our lives forever. And I honestly think a lot of, you know, those early calls that y'all were making when, you know, my then at the time husband was living in a trailer in the driveway because people were getting COVID and y'all didn't know what it was yet. Y'all were making calls where people were drowning to death in their homes, not in water. And so it was scary at first. We didn't have access to immunizations, and there was just a lot of hard that happened that first year, year and a half, 2 years. All that to say, I think it really had a direct impact on a lot of y'all first responders, most especially EMS and AFD. So I'd like very much to, after we finish this budget process, have some real substantive discussion around COVID impact, mental health and wellness. You know, why are folks calling in and taking more leave? There's a reason. There was some impetus, you know, and so I'd like very much to dig into that once we're done with this process. But as it pertains to this process, I really appreciate how you just laid out the 3-man, 4-man staffing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for having him really delineate between the apparatus and have people fully understand. Because, you know, lay people, we're thinking a fire truck comes, it has water and a ladder and it does all the things. But unfortunately, fire trucks are not Swiss Army knives and they don't do all the things. So I think that was the full extent of you really actually answered beyond what I was asking when you made the clarification around the NFPA 17-person requirement and our excess of, and the implications subsequent to us, hitting that, what I call worst-case scenario. So all my questions here have been answered,
But
Chief.
let me just add one thing, because you
Sure.
mentioned mental health and PTSD.
Yeah,
Mental health is on the rise, my opinion, across America in the fire service,
Agreed.
not just in Austin. In order for our members to get the mental health care they need to be off.
right,
They can't be off if they're working overtime.
right.
So when a person take off, I had to hire someone overtime. And the person I'm hiring overtime may be the person who need to be off on
Right.
their off day to get the mental health they need.
The conundrum.
And
it's
with
the
this 4 and
processors.
3 staffing model, where I don't have enough personnel, it would not require me to overwork those personnel who already experience some form of mental health or PTSD medical issues.
Well
Give
received.
them the time off they need and give them the rest they need. The members are being overworked because they're working a lot of overtime.
Well received. You don't have to sell me, Chief. I fully understand. Personally, anecdotally, and professionally, I recognize the implications.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So moving forward, there was the one slide about development services. Well, I wrote it on this page. I think you discussed it a few pages prior to, where we were talking about creek infrastructure, and you mentioned some specific assets. Walnut was one. What was the other specific creek asset that you mentioned when you were talking about creek infrastructure? I think it was, we had moved to watershed protection, 24/6 in watershed protections, FY. And it says operating budget for floodplain management, stormwater infrastructure maintenance, and debris removal from creeks to reduce local flood risk. It was right around that slide where you mentioned several city-specific creek assets.
Yes, so the largest CIP projects in the past 5 years for flood control include Little Walnut Creek near Metric and Rutland, Upper Onion Creek buyouts, numerous projects within Waller Creek, Bull Creek, Shoal Creek. There are others that I didn't mention, like Williamson Creek, Bogey Creek, and Slaughter Creek are also some of the projects.
I appreciate you bringing up Boggy, because Boggy is District 1. I was wondering which District 1 specific assets. And so adjacent to Metric and Rutland with Cheeto and then Boggy specifically. But I'd like to note that I'll probably bring this to the Mobility Committee. You remember we talked about future items that recently, and just talking about that trail connectivity component. I think an update there might be helpful with figuring out what adjustments can be made here. So I think I'll bring that up in committee.
Absolutely.
And so the question I had here, though, the debris removal component from creeks to reduce local flood risk. In a later slide, it talks about the implications of sharing cost with other departments when their efforts are duplicative. And so I started thinking about our homelessness resource recovery efforts and creek cleanups. I just wanted to make certain that this debris removal from creeks to reduce local flood risk and our efforts around creek cleanup because of human refuse are adjacent to one another. And I can get it answered later. I don't have to have it answered now. I just would like to have that discussion.
I can give you a quick answer, Councilmember.
Okay.
Jorge Morales, Director of the Watershed Protection. Yes, our efforts are coordinated with the Homeless Strategy Office, and we do have funding in our budget to help account for that as well.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. That's my only question there. And then on the development services side, the one bullet that caught my attention was the dissolved one expedited team, reallocated staff, shifted 5 staff to airport expansion review team, et cetera, et cetera. I wonder if some of these discussions that we're having with our constituents around development services, it might be helpful for us to understand the dissolved expedited team. Is the removal of the expedition services a part of what folks are presenting as a challenge with the time it takes to secure permitting? And if so, is that something we should revisit? Hi there.
Good morning, Mayor, council members. Keith Mars, Interim Director of Development Services Department. So the expedited review teams, we previously had larger teams that address both commercial and residential projects. As the volume and development went down, to better utilize those staff, we saw also opportunities in city capital projects namely the airport expansion where there was a dramatic need for those services. So we were able to reduce our cost for private development and apply that resource to the public development to make sure the airport permitting went on schedule. So that did not come at an impact to the service and the timely services that private development is doing.
I appreciate it. That was the answer to my question, and it doesn't continue. It didn't then and doesn't now
Correct.
have any effect on. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then my final question. It is development services. Thank you, Mr. Morris. Contingency budget for the third party if spike in development. So, I couldn't help but notice we had that chart that showed, we had a spike in development and then a substantial decrease. And Ed and I, we were remarking, we're sky looking people. And so just remarking that the sky looks different in July of 2025 than it did in March of 2023. Where'd all the cranes go? And so being able to recognize visibly that development has dropped. And so that potential anticipation for the third-party budget spike, what does that contingency budget go towards if there isn't a development spike? And what's the threshold in terms of the timeline benchmark? Like if we say by November 26, we hadn't spent that contingency money, can we give it all to the Northeast Planning District?
Councilmember.
Just using a hypothetical, right?
Hypothetically, Mr. Mayor.
All right.
Well, since development services being the cost of service model, it would just be costs that are not realized. So we're
Okay.
budgeting for those monies if they are needed. We do assess volume on a weekly, monthly basis, and once we start to see trends, then that is when we will deploy those third-party resources, rather than in the past of scaling up with full-time employees to be more responsive to the ups and downs of the cyclical market.
Okay. And I've actually, I told a slight fib. Well, it's not a fib because I said that was my last question. This is comments. I know we have some time scheduled to meet with you guys about development services fees. I mean, we were advocating last year, most especially for commercial constituents, to get some fees decreased. And now there's this extraordinarily dramatic increase. That's exactly the opposite of what we were advocating for. So really looking forward to getting some clarification there, some clarity about what fee increases look like. And to the point of the commentary from the Restaurant Association, just one of those things, again, I can't believe how frequently I'm going back to COVID. Back to COVID, we realized food services, food, access to food, restaurants, restaurateurs, food purveyors, food systems, how critical those services and functions are. And if they don't work because of us, then we are the problem. And I want to make certain that during the course of us addressing how we allocate our budget, I want to make certain that our systems work effectively too, especially given the limitations with our fiscal resources. Thank you for your time. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Lane, Councilmember Siegel, Councilmember Ellis.
I can start with DSD since you're up there already. Okay. Thank you. So my first question is, as you were building out the proposal for the fee increases, can you walk me through what type of stakeholder engagement was part of that process?
Yes, Councilmember. So we met with a broad range of stakeholders, primarily those that experience the permitting system and the fees. We met with them within 48 hours after the city manager's release of the FY26 budget. We walked them through the fees, both the fees that are increasing, but also important note of fees that are decreasing. About 60% are increasing, 40% that are decreasing. Walking through the methodology, walking through what in terms of DSD fees they will experience, both those that are proposed to increase and those that are decreasing.
Can you share with me what types of stakeholders were included in that mix, or how many? Like, what did that look like?
So generally, the stakeholders that we engaged with are those that represent organizations, and it ranged everything from small single-family residential all the way to office, multifamily, commercial interest, and then basically every group in between.
Okay. So it's no mystery that it is both expensive, it's as expensive in terms of both time and money to do any form of development or renovation or any sort of project like that in Austin. And it is incumbent on us as leadership of the city to find ways to streamline that process in terms of both the amount of money it costs and also the amount of time that it takes to move through the process. The stories I've heard from small individuals working on small developments that include many of the goals that we hear about often, transitional housing, support for families who are experiencing homelessness, seniors having adequate place to gather. I mean, people-centered design, access to trails, access to green space. There are many, many goals that this city has that we don't necessarily, our normal ways of incentivizing these types of things maybe don't apply all over the city. They apply more so in the central parts of the city. But for me personally, very important that we are finding ways that to move through our process quickly, effectively, with minimal expense, the types of projects especially that align with our values as a city. And so I look at something like expedited review. Okay, so we already know we're increasing fees in a lot of ways. That's going to hurt some people. We heard from some stakeholders here. I am a proponent of fees and streamlining, but I also think that when we have these challenges within our own city for how people can navigate the system, it's incumbent on us to bring some savings before we're increasing even more. And so I guess that's actually my first question. What type of time or money savings for the users of development services are we already offering as we increase these fees? You want me to clarify a little bit?
Please.
Okay, so for example, when the McKinsey Consulting report came out, it talked about the number of months that it takes to go through the development process. Have we delivered an overall shortening of that time, which would save our users money as well? I've heard many stories of construction loans expiring before they've gotten through the Austin process, having to go back, and then it's much more costly for them. And so if they could have gotten through faster, then it would save them money without us giving money back, just simply by providing a faster delivery.
Thank you, Councilmember. I understand your question. So yes, in terms of what is one getting for the service, what are you getting for the cost? So this coming year, we will launch expedited site plan as a pilot, and it aligns with council priorities. It will be for housing projects. Ideally, this is a pilot, so we're able to expand later based on the learned session and the feedback that we received from the process. Going back to your point about what we call the transforming site plan, we went from 18 months on average for a site plan to now down to 12 to 14. The process has improved and improved dramatically, and we are hearing that feedback from stakeholders. That is good, but it is not where we want to be long term. This is part of continuous improvement. The expedited model, we are setting a target date of getting to site plan permit in 6 months.
Okay.
So yes, ma'am.
That is really good to hear. We're hearing about the dissolution of the expedited process, and I'm happy to hear that there's a pilot coming. And I hope that we can connect a little bit more specifically on what that looks like, because even with our fellow local governments, the challenges of getting through the process leads to projects that they are paying for if they're in Austin, getting pushed to the end of the line, which really hurts certain communities disproportionately. So I hope we can talk a little bit about who's included and whether it's some of the incentives and that kind of thing.
Yes, Councilmember.
Okay. Thank you. I know that wasn't an easy start, but I'm good for development services. Fire, Chief Baker. I know I've called you a lot of times. Welcome. And I'm going to try not to tread the ground that we've tread in prior work sessions through my questions and through Natasha Harper-Madison's questions. When I'm looking at the memo that came out yesterday, it is definitely striking to me how Austin Fire Department overtime rates were relatively stable at 30% for many years. And then they began to grow around 2021, getting dangerously close to 40%. I appreciate the explanation that as current staffing models exist and will be maintained under any of the proposals that are at play right now, we will continue to staff based on 5 firefighters, which allows for a 25% call-out rate. And so we clearly see what our target is on the call-out rate. I also would like to note that it's interesting to me that the overtime rate and the call-out rate increased at the same time. So it tells me, as you have also talked about, that we have some work to do on ensuring that the leave policies and any other factors that might be impacting the call-out rate are addressed, but we also are not anywhere that's sustainable. The charts really tell that story. So I wanted to lay that out. And then I have a question. I understand how this proposal will impact overtime spending. I'm wondering what, if any, other approaches have been taken to, like from a management perspective, to work on the call-out rate specifically, to identify the driving factors. Has that work begun, or will it be part of what happens in the coming year?
Well, thank you for that question, ma'am. Again, Joel Baker, Austin Fire Department Fire Chief. One thing we have looked at is how many personnel can we allow off on vacation time? And we try to manage that the best way we can, because what we don't want to happen is to deny our members to take the vacation time they have earned and to bank so much vacation time that come close towards the end of their career or the following year, they have so much vacation time, we have to make them take off or they'll lose their time. We don't want that to happen. So we try our best to manage that. We had a lot of IOJs, injury on the job injuries, but with the help of our HRD department and other services, we have really gotten down those injuries on the job through different programs. I mean, we really seen the members getting back to work, so that has helped us out a lot too. Recently, we had approximately, I think 100 vacancies, but we just graduated a recruit class, so now we are down approximately 60 vacancies, and come October this year, we should have about 30 vacancies. So we are hiring and training as fast as we can to help us with the vacancies rate and getting people back to work. And I'm currently looking at our sick leave policy, what adjustment or change I need to make in the sick leave policy without telling them they can't take sick. If you're sick, you just need to be sick. I'm just having some challenges, especially on the weekend, with the high numbers of sick leave. For example, Mondays through Thursday, we have approximately 20 to 25 plus or minus people off on sick leave. But on Saturday, Sunday, the sick leave can go anywhere between 40 to 50, if not more, people off on on Saturdays and Sundays. So we're looking at ways to change that type of behavior as well. Mm-hmm. But again, it's important that I stress, I'm not here advocating reducing 4-person staffing. What I'm here advocating is when I don't have enough people at work to give me the leeway as the fire chief to staff the engine with 3. I'm not advocating to reduce our staffing from 355 firefighter personnel per shift, because I need 268. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying when I don't have enough people at work, then I should be allowed to run the engine with 3 personnel. We still will have 4-on-4 staffing when the personnel are at work, and when they come to work, we'll have the members on the unit. But without making the members work overtime, it would get, again, I need to stress, it would give them the time off that they need to work on their mental illness that they tell me they have. The firefighter, they need to take their time off. But yet, right now, they're working a lot of overtime. I just don't have the people at work to fill those seats.
Thank you. You anticipated my next question, which was, are there any days or other are there any days, times of day, days of week that this call-out rate spikes? And so we're seeing it spike on the weekends, versus the weekdays is what I heard, and therefore our weekend call-out rate likely, it sounds like, is for over 40% because that's where the bump is. Like mathematically, that would be true. So that's good to know. I personally have never worked anywhere where there's a 40% call-out rate. That's very surprising to me, and it is very important that we provide our leadership, you and other leadership in fire, with the tools to address that. Because a 25% target, we've got to have enough things to leverage to get us back there. The rate, I really appreciate the way that this aspect of the budget was built out, city manager and Carrie as well, with emphasizing the reduction in overtime, because overtime should be something that we rely on in emergency situations, as we have. That is when it started to grow. But when we are not in an emergency is when we need to stabilize, and we need to use that money as effectively as we can to support our personnel. And so thank you for bringing this to the fore, the issue of overtime, and the work that you've already done on it. I have a couple of other just specific questions before I'm done with fire. My district, as y'all have heard many times, is unusual in that it is entirely comprised of outlying parts of the city. We don't have any central parts of the city in my district. Can you tell me how the proposed reforms and as it relates to overtime and these proposals on the table would impact response times in the outlying area, if at all?
Yes, the response time, whether I have 4, 5, 6, 20 people on the truck, the response time is going to be the same. It's the apparatus that's going from the fire station to the emergency. So response time would be the same. And once the personnel get on the scene again, we will have the effective firefighter force to mitigate those emergencies on the scene. In your particular area, ma'am, and other council member area, we have automatic aid agreement with surrounding ESDs and cities. So it's the closest response unit will arrive on the scene. So you may get another unit outside of Austin in your territory, or you may receive an Austin unit on the scene. But be that as it may, the Austin Fire Department personnel, we stand at the ready to respond to these emergency calls.
And also out in my area, something that really impacts response time is traffic. We've got a lot of places that you can get to by one very congested roadway. And so it's one of the reasons that as response times, as we think about response times, it's important to me to avoid the blackouts and brownouts, which likely would impact, some of these outlying areas. So I appreciate your responses in this area. I'll wrap up right there. Done with fire. I would like to be on the list for a second round related to transportation and public works and Austin Energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Siegel, Councilmember Ellis, Councilmember Duchin.
Thank you, Mayor. And I guess Chief Baker, as long as you're there.
Absolutely.
I was going to mix it up a little bit, but just to save you some walking. And thank you so much for your transparency and leadership and all these efforts. I know what's going on with the fire department is not easy. And I just want to share that I've heard pretty clearly from firefighters that the 4-person staffing requirement is something that gives firefighters safety and security and peace of mind. And so this is obviously is not a decision we can take lightly. I want to know, are there other major cities that have gone down from a 4-person staffing model to a model where 3-person on an engine is okay?
I don't have in my memory bank what other cities that have gone down from 4 to 3-person staffing. I can research that and get back with you. However, there are other major cities that do not have a 4 and 4 staffing model throughout the country. So, for example, the department I formerly used to work at, which is a comparable side to the city of Austin, do not have a mandatory 4 and 4 staffing model. They have a 4 and 3 staffing model. So I'm quite sure there's other major cities, the comparable side of Austin, that have a 4 and 3 staffing model, and there may be some that have a 4 and 4 staffing model. So to be transparent, but I do not know of any cities per se that have changed that. But also, I'm not familiar with any cities that have a mandatory city ordinance that mandate that they maintain a 4 and 3 staffing model. I'm not aware of any cities that the city council has directed the fire chief that you shall have a 4 and 4 staffing model. I'm not aware of any major cities where the city council or management have directed the fire chief you cannot modify your staffing model to fit the needs of the city or the department.
That's fair. And actually, that leads to my second question here, which is, I hear pretty clearly the data is clear that we have an issue regarding, the absence rate in the department and overtime costs. And I guess my question is about the process to resolve that issue. As a city, we've adopted collective bargaining, right? Under Chapter 143, that's actually something that the City of Austin voters asked us to do, is to collectively bargain with the Firefighters Association. And a core principle of collective bargaining is that we make decisions affecting the workplace that affect working conditions, that both the union and the city are at the table. And so I will say I've been in work settings, such as working for public school districts, where HR has policies about leave to make sure it's being used properly. You have to get a doctor's note, or there's more scrutiny if you try to take a 3-day weekend, that kind of thing. But my question is, could we build a more comprehensive approach to fire department staffing and absences through collective bargaining, right? A process that's supposed to start in just a few weeks. And would that be a way we could really dig into these issues about the absence rate?
That's a possibility, but as you may be aware, I'm not totally engaged with the collective bargaining agreement that's between the union and the city manager. But you're right, the union has if I heard you correctly, their goal is to make sure safety of the employees. Well, safety starts with mental health as well. There was a time here in the fire service in America where the firefighters used to say, we said, not they, we said, that cancer was the #1 cause of death in the fire service, heart attacks. But cancer was the #1 cause of death and heart attacks for American citizens. Now we're saying that mental illness is #1 cause of death. But mental illness rise across the country in the civilian workforce. So I'm all in favor as a firefighter and fire chief, because I have not always worn this fire chief uniform. I have worked on the back of fire trucks. I have been on calls where the roofs is falling and you got to save babies, and you pray as you're going in, and you pray as while you're inside the house as you come out the house. And I have been on many calls, or many close calls. I've been on special operation, a hazmat team, and put myself in harm's way. So I do not take the safety of our firefighter for granted. There was no fire chief in the country, to my knowledge, will come before council and say, put my firefighters in danger, do this. I'm not saying put my firefighters in danger and go to a 4 and 3 staffing metric. What I'm asking is to give me the authority as the fire chief to manage properly my budget, to manage properly my staffing metric, and to encourage my members to come to work. Again, with 355 personnel assigned per shift, I only need 268, and I cannot fill 268 positions, especially on the weekend and some days throughout the week. I'm constantly hiring overtime. The members have put me on notice. We have mental illness and PTSD, but yet I'm still telling those members, you shall work, not you should, not you maybe. You shall come to work and fill these overtime seats. The only way that I can think of right now sitting here to get those members time off is to reduce my overtime to allow those firefighters time to rest and time to spend with their family. The paradigm has shifted in the fire service. When I was as a firefighter back in 1986, I'm aging myself, but I'm proud to say, you dare not call in sick. You came to work with the flu and broken arm and everything else, and you just laid in the bed and wait and hope you didn't get a call that day. Or the member left you in the station, and we call looking out for our troops, and leave them in the station on the fire call because they're too sick to go on calls. I'm not advocating that. If you're sick, you must take off sick. I just find it hard to believe that 50 people are sick on Saturday, but you're not sick on Monday. I have a challenge with that. So I'm not saying put my firefighter in harm's way. I'm saying allow me as the fire chief to manage the fire department. Allow me as a fire chief to manage the staffing model. Again, according to NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, which requires 17 personnel on a house fire, and we currently send 32. And if we go to a 4 and 3 staffing model, we would send 24. I would still exceed the National Fire Protection Association requirement. So I'm doing all I can do to protect the citizens of Austin and the stakeholders as well as the firefighters. I just need a help from council to help me get there.
Well, thank you, Chief. I don't have further questions, but I will say that, I hear your concerns, and I'm much more comfortable resolving these issues with the union at the table through the collective bargaining process instead of through, a council action. And just to my colleagues, I don't want to balance the budget in a way that makes our firefighters feel less safe. And so this might be one of the reasons why we do need a tax rate increase. But thank you, Chief. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
sir.
I want to move on to a different department. Thank you. If we could actually ask Austin Energy to come up, please.
Good morning, Stuart Riley, Austin Energy.
Thank you, Stuart. So my first question is about what's in the budget for weatherization for low-income households. I don't know if you're prepared to share today how much funding is currently proposed for both single-family and multifamily weatherization.
I don't have the specific numbers. Our customer energy solutions rebate budget overall has gone up $3.7 million, but I can get back to you on the line items of how each of those programs.
Thank you. And also, do you have the data on how much funding is proposed for EV charging stations?
I do not. We can get you the data on that.
Sorry. And then I guess this is more of a general question. Do you know how Austin Energy's rates and bills for residential, commercial, and industrial customers compare to those charged by other energy? Bless you. How do we compare to other energy providers across Texas?
Yes, absolutely. So typically we look at bills and not rates, but we do a comparison based on both bills and rates. The reason we look at customer bills in particular is because we've done so much in terms of energy efficiency, energy code. We have a very efficient customer base in comparison to the rest of the state. And while customers use less energy, we still have to get to cost recovery. So oftentimes we compare our bills against our peers across the state. Based on the most recent Energy Information Administration data, EIA data, our average customer bill based on that year's data is about $114, whereas the state average is about $50 per month higher than that. We have the second lowest customer bills in ERCOT. There have been some recent changes to some other utilities rates, which look like that would make us the lowest residential customer bills in ERCOT and the second lowest bills in the state after El Paso.
Oh, that's great news. Well, thanks so much. That's it for today, and I'll follow up on the other questions.
Thank you.
And then I guess my last set of questions, if I have a couple more minutes, Mayor.
You do.
Thank you, sir. I guess for Director Lang, I have some questions about the base budget and whether or not it's sustainable without a tax rate election. And so I want to start with the Housing Trust Fund, which, as proposed, would be depleted and would not be replenished under the base budget. The biggest expense is about $8 million in operating costs for the marshalling yards shelter. And I guess to the extent we know, what would be the plan after this year to fund the marshalling yard?
We are still looking at funding options. We haven't identified anything. As you know, the marshal yard is a general fund cost. And so we haven't identified any additional or other opportunities at the moment, but we will continue to work. But we're really relying on if sales tax increased or our major revenue sources that we currently depend on, we would look at how those would be changing to potentially fund it. Otherwise, there would be no funding sources.
Okay, thank you. And then we've also been using the trust fund for our emergency housing voucher program and emergency rental assistance program. Do we have a funding stream for these types of programs after this year?
No.
Okay. Do we know how many people would be affected if these programs were to go away?
I would turn to either Mandy DeMayo or David Gray for that information.
Thank you.
Mandy DeMayo, Housing Department. Regarding the Housing Trust Fund program, currently funded programs, the local housing voucher will serve 374 individuals experiencing homelessness. The with respect to the emergency rental assistance, we provide on average about $5,000 per person. So it scales accordingly depending on how much money is allocated. Currently, in this year's budget, we have $4 million allocated for emergency rental assistance.
So let's see. Check my mental math here.
Yeah, we're all watching.
I'm going to leave the mental math to you. It's an average per household, and then, of course, there's administrative costs as well.
Okay.
We contract with El Buen Samaritano to provide the services.
Thank you, Director. Appreciate it. And then back to you, Director Lang. I guess a few months ago we were told Austin faced about a $33 million structural deficit under the budget forecast. It looks like about half of that is being filled by lowering our reserve levels, about $16 million. Another third from draining the Housing Trust Fund. Apart from those funds, the reserve and the trust fund, are there any other one-time funds that are being used for ongoing expenses?
No, there are not.
Okay, great, thank you. And then looking at the 2027 balanced budget, am I right that the planned budget anticipates no wage increases for civilians, significant cuts to social services, and significant cuts to facilities maintenance?
Yes, that is correct.
Has there been an analysis of the impact on employee retention if there are no civilian wage increases?
We have not completed that analysis for fiscal year 27. As we were creating the proposed budget, we were looking at what levers we could use to balance. We understood that those were significant adjustments or cuts, and would work with the Human Resources Department and the team to see what those impacts would be once we got through the budget process.
Fair enough, thank you. And then last question, do we have more detail on what the facility maintenance funding cuts would be under the planned 2027 budget?
Say that one more time, I'm sorry.
Would you mind providing more detail on what facility maintenance funding cuts there would be under the planned 2027 budget?
So what we cut or would plan to cut is the mandated transfer to the Capital Rehabilitation Fund. So we have a financial policy that's tied to the depreciated values of our assets to drive out that number. And then each year we would look to see what the most pressing projects are to use with that available funding. But that analysis doesn't take place until late in the development process as we see the available funding. So we wouldn't be able to say right now what those projects would be, but we do know that we would have about $12 million less in available cash to meet our most pressing facilities maintenance needs.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nelson. And just reporting that my staff did the math, it looks like about 800 families would benefit from the Emergency Rental Assistance Program.
And Councilmember, I guess let me clarify as well. You asked about the impact of the reduction of the 3% wage adjustment. We are also, for fiscal year 27, we do have a placeholder for a citywide market study that would allow for adjustments as well, but it does not include the 3% wage adjustment. So there is some analysis that will be done for that market study.
Thanks very much. Back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Ellis, Councilmember Duchin, Councilmember Alter.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to switch over to sidewalk conversation. Lots of good information to digest here. My first question is going to be on slide number 8. The small print at the bottom says sidewalk spending presented in the table includes construction through other programs funding. Can you explain a bit more what that means?
Certainly,
what are the other programs?
Richard Mendoza, Director of Transportation Public Works. So the majority of our annual sidewalk capital spend is provided through the bond referendums as approved by voters in 16, 18, and 20. We also receive capital contributions from Cat Metro through an ILA around their bus stops. We also receive grants, grant funding that will be applied to the capital program. And trying to think of some other sources, but those would be two of the primary other funding sources.
Okay, that's helpful. And then I'm curious about the top two bullet points, the $8.4 million for TPW's operating budget for maintenance and other program management. Do you know roughly how many miles are considered in that $8.4 million?
So the $8.4 million in 25, our target is to completely rehabilitate and replace approximately 17 miles of sidewalk.
17, okay. And the other bullet point, the $34.5 million for capital spending for, I'm guessing that's going to be our new sidewalks. Can you tell me how many miles that should get us?
For 25, yes, I got that number. And that's primarily from the voter-approved bond referendums. 26 miles of new sidewalk is the target for FY26.
Okay, that is helpful. And then I had noticed in some of the budget recommendations that went to the Urban Transportation Commission, it seems like we have a goal of 80% functionally acceptable. Can you define what that means for
Correct.
a layperson?
Yeah, functionally acceptable sidewalk meets the minimum ADA requirements for cross slope of 2%, running slope of 6%, no significant unevenness or cracks in excess of, I believe it's half an inch to an inch. And we conduct a sidewalk condition assessment. We completed that about 3 years ago. The target is 80% of our existing network of over 2,500 curb miles to be in that condition. In 16, with the first significant sidewalk voter referendum, that percentage was as low as 25%. And right now, we're hovering right around the 47 to 50% level, so we've improved it by double.
Where would you like to be if
the
money
80
was not an issue?
80%, ma'am.
Okay. I really appreciate that, and I know that there's always the catch-22 of you spend capital dollars to create new sidewalks, and then obviously we're on the hook to maintain those over the years. Right. I know that at my community fair that I did in late April, I had a woman come and approach me and talk about the need for repairs in her neighborhood, even just the basic minimum of some of the worst places where the sidewalk is buckling to be fixed. And so I just know this is something that my constituents are really interested in, making sure that we're funding appropriately, but also know that we have a fantastic sidewalk department. They are, performing above and beyond as far as being able to deliver projects and get actual sidewalk miles on the ground. So I really appreciate that and want to make sure that we're bringing all those services and maintenance up to the level that I think the public is expecting. Can you talk to me about the FY27 plan? You see some of the bond dollars are getting spent, and so you start to see some of the spending go down. So for FY26, it says $34.5 million, but then FY27 is only $5.8 million. Can you tell me about the timeline if there's sidewalk dollars included in the 2026 bond and voters decide to approve that bond? How quickly would we be able to utilize dollars and start building more sidewalks out?
So if that referendum is approved for a sidewalk program, I'd have to ask finance in terms of how soon that money would be available.
Day one, right?
Maybe not day one, but as soon as we could get back to council with a spending plan for those dollars to appropriate the funds and move forward. We don't have to wait till we actually enter the bond market and issue the bonds. We can start sooner than that. So perhaps not day one, but certainly within 1 or 2 months, we could have an item in front of council to appropriate funds and start implementing that program.
Okay, that's helpful. And my next question is just going to be about any gaps in funding. So I know that as we close out the current fiscal year, we're seeing a lot of departments, trying to tighten up the budgets and delay some other spending. Are there any more dollars that are needed to get us to October 1st before the 26 budget will kick in?
Yeah, the current capital spend plan will get us to October 1 of 26.
Okay, so we'll be good for this year and then
into next year.
Hopefully have enough dollars for October 1st.
Yes.
Through the next fiscal year. And then my last question on this topic is going to be about urban trails. So I know you, Director Mendoza, were a part of TPW when it was one entity, and then it split off into Transportation and Public Works separately, and we saw some of the sidewalks and urban trails programs get separated. Now they're back into one department again. Can you talk to me briefly about if there's any need for more urban trails money, or if there's more information that we should have as a council?
Most certainly. On page 515 of your budget book, there's a line item there for sidewalk maintenance. That's $9.2 million. Of that $9.2 million, $800,000 of that is going to be programmed for urban trails maintenance, and then the residual 8.4 is for sidewalk. And so our urban trails system is relatively young compared to our sidewalk network. However, it will be reaching a point where it will require some ongoing maintenance, so we've begun that programming now. We have placed urban trails and sidewalk programs under one division manager, and since the work is very similar in nature, we used concrete for our urban trails, and so that line item in the budget will speak to the maintenance of urban trails now and moving forward.
Okay, fantastic. I appreciate that. I know our urban trails program is something that the community really gets a lot of enjoyment out of. I know when former Secretary Pete Buttigieg was in town, he was fascinated to hear about not every single bike lane that we have in Austin is on the roadway or immediately adjacent to the roadway, that we're utilizing our park system to be able to help folks with recreation or commuting by bike, and that was something that he was pretty fascinated about. I think that's all I have for that topic. I'm going to have a couple of brief questions for the fire department, and then maybe one quick one that I don't know if that's going to be for budget staff or for DSD. Just one very quick one. Hi, Chief Baker. I've appreciated the conversation and the Q&A with the other council members so far. I just had one brief question about overtime. Is it mandatory for folks? How do you decide if someone's calling out who to call in? How does that work? Is it a voluntary, folks can come in if they want to, or is it mandatory and the department picks and chooses who gets that phone call? Can you explain that to me?
I'm going to go from memory, but I think my chief of staff may be able to answer that question, but he stepped on the phone call. So let me try it this way. It's mandatory to work overtime. We have it called mandatory added time, but we have the UKG system will pick, I believe, based on who's next in line to get overtime. It's whoever's next up in line. If that person is not available, then we will call. Let me rephrase that. Those members who are on candidates get first pick at overtime. Once we run through the candidate list, then we go through who's next in line. And I want to say, I'm not 100% sure, it's based on the lowest paid firefighter, I think. I'm not 100% sure about that. It's changed so many times. And then we will go through those two lists. If we still need personnel, we have a mandatory added time list that we pick from that you shall work. Those members who are made or forced to work overtime, they get to turn it down one time per year. You get to say, well, I know you ordered me to come, but I want to take this option not to work. So we'll skip that person to go to someone else. They get to turn it down one time per year. And I think there's some other criteria involved.
Okay, so it's kind of like a on-call list, like you may get that phone call when the shift is about to begin, just to make sure that you know you've got people in the station.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And I will point out, I know the conversation around overtime budgets with fire department have been a conversation for a while. I know in 2023, there's an article I was just reading about former council member Allison Alter, when we had two Alters on the dais, and the overtime cost was upwards of $20 million. And so I think as we have this conversation around $8 million to try to help just make sure that we have the staffing that we need, I think it's an important perspective to see that there have been changes made, there have been reductions in overtime costs, and just trying to balance making sure we have the right folks showing up for the right calls. Thank you. That's all I have for fire. And then my last question is going to be about development services. I had a question about on slide number 14, it talks about fees for different types of housing, single-family dwelling unit, infill residential, re-subdivision, small project, and multifamily. Can you explain what the small project is? Is that going to be our duplexes up to quadplexes, or how is that being defined with DSD right now?
Yes, Councilmember Keith Mars again, Development Services Department. So a small project is a reflection of council's action on infill ordinance earlier this year. So this is the 5 to 16 unit small project site plan of that missing middle housing, where we do see that DSD fees are going down and going from about $20,000 and change to $15,000 and change. And Councilmember, if I may, it's also a reflection of not just council action and policy change that's driving down fees. It's also what DSD has done on controlling and managing our expenses. We, just in FY26 alone, we're looking at reducing our expenses by a little bit over $8 million, and that's from right-sizing our staffing, that is moving staff to other departments that are better fit with their core missions, reallocation of some of the work to be more effective and efficient before we even start calculating fees, is managing and controlling our expenses, and that's what you're seeing in these numbers.
Okay, so we've got our single-family unit. Is that below 1,800 square feet?
That's correct, and that is a per unit up to 3 units, again, as a response to council action allowing up to 3 homes on a single-family lot.
Perfect. And then the infill residential re-subdivision is subdividing the lot itself?
That's correct, Councilmember. Again, a reflection of council's change earlier this year for the re-subdivision process for infill subdivision.
Perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood how those were lined up with some of those actions. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Duchin, Councilmember Alter, and Councilmember Vela.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of comments just to start out with for the budget team. First, just to thank you for your continued work and effort on this. I know you poured a tremendous amount of energy into this and have been very available, particularly for certain meetings that might have run long. So I appreciate your patience on that. First question is regarding the TRE scenarios that you shared with us. And I realize this is outside of specifically capital stuff that we're talking about today, but I'm just curious, the 1 cent scenario covers just the 1 year shortfall, whereas going beyond that, the 2 to 8 cent scenarios cover a 4-year window. I'm curious, has there been a calculation that was done to understand if there was a 1 cent scenario that covered maybe a certain subset of items for 4 years, what the value that we could afford of projects or items would be for that 4-year window? Does that question make sense?
Off the top of my head, I think if we levied that 1 cent in the first year, with our inflation assumptions on both sides, we end up with about 1.7 million to the good in the general fund in the last year. So if you discount that a little bit, you could probably afford about 1.5 million in ongoing spending in the first year. And then, of course, in those early years, you'd have additional funding then to transfer to reserves to get, those would be in much better, the reserves would be in much better shape in that scenario, but you couldn't sustain a large amount of ongoing funding because of those burgeoning deficits we have just in our base budget in the out years.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Second question is it possible to get a understanding of the service prioritization report that you shared with us that has the same format as the enhancement report, which breaks down items between ongoing and one-time funding? Currently, there's just, I think, a single column in that service prioritization report that shows us what the savings would be, but doesn't really make it clear, I think, unless I interpret the FTEs associated with those line items, whether that's one-time or ongoing. And I'm going somewhere with this, so I'm curious if you have an answer for.
So the prioritizations are ongoing savings because we were looking at the ongoing impact. So that's why it's not a breakdown between.
Okay, so all of them are ongoing, not one time. Okay, thank you. So to build on that, if I look at some of those service prioritizations, and let's say I'm looking at maybe aviation, which has a total of, I think, about $9 million that are not currently part of the budget changes. I'm wondering how, if we implemented those changes and we made changes to the budget with them, how fungible are those dollars from aviation to a different department? If we say transfer them to the general fund or use them to decrease the amount of reserves perhaps that we need to allocate this year.
So the various funds, our enterprise funds in particular, they are for specific areas. Aviation in particular, everything that aviation spends or saves, or it must be within the fence of the airport. So there's no ability for us to transfer any of their savings into the general fund.
Thank you. And but that would not be true for non-enterprise funds. Is that correct?
There is some nuance there, and so it may generate partial savings to for example, our support services fund is about 50% funded through general fund dollars. So any savings in support services would result in savings in the general fund. But the other funds in particular would not necessarily create a savings for the general fund.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Then regarding specifically CIP projects that are scheduled for 2026, 27, what would be the implication, let's say we identified one or two projects or X amount of projects and said these projects we could potentially, they're not urgent, so we could postpone them for 1 or 2 years until we resolve the systemic challenge between revenue and expenses in the city. Is that something that's realistic, or are these pre-planned 5 years in advance that would not be possible?
So the bond dollars that we have, the CIP projects that we have, they're already planned out. But typically what happens is the longer we delay it, the more it costs. And so we want to be careful to not add costs by delaying those projects. And it will not provide any savings again on the general fund side because those are CIP one-time funds.
Got it. Okay. If I've got specific questions about a couple of, I'll just use one example that you all supervise because it's in information technology. Some of the ones that may not make sense when I read them in the budget. One is called like the vegetation risk management analysis. It's about $500,000 over a 2-year window with about $300,000 in the planned budget. First, maybe you can expand on, or we can ask somebody in CTM what this means, what vegetation risk management is doing in IT, and then understanding if we did delay this or if it wasn't necessary or urgent, will we just be using those dollars for a different CTM project then?
Can you tell me what page you're on?
I think it's on page 736.
So that is information technology within Austin Energy. And so when you look at that, that's not a part of our CTM or Technology Services Department. That is a Austin Energy function. I don't know if you know. Let me pull Stuart up here for a second.
Councilmember Stuart Riley, Austin Energy Interim General Manager. So our wildfire mitigation program team has a new software, I believe it's called Techno Silva, which we'll be rolling out to enhance our wildfire analytics and preparedness in addition to our Pano AI wildfire detection system.
Okay, thank you for helping me understand that. I've got a couple more questions, actually, so I'm glad you joined us, Director Riley. I had a question, actually, about the borrowing for capital improvements within Austin Energy. We noticed that it seems like the debt services costs are increasing almost by 25%. And I'm curious if you can help me understand what's going on with that borrowing.
Well, the borrowing is to support our growing CIP needs. And so as our CIP forecast and our CIP plan for the next 5 years has gone up substantially, not only from increasing costs and inflation, but also from the enhanced needs on our system in terms of resiliency, reliability, and also making transmission investments.
Well, specifically, I mean, I can understand the raw number increase in the amount of debt based on the CIP agreements, but I'm referring to specifically the percentage increase, which seems to be going up much faster than it was. So, I don't know. Again, happy to visit offline if that's a better.
And we can get into the specifics, but one factor there is we have had to increase our percentage of debt to equity in terms of our investments. So while we may have previously been at a 50-50 split, now we might be at a 60-40 split, staying within financial policy, but a greater, as we have less cash to support those investments, we're borrowing more to get over the hump.
Okay, thank you. Second question, if we were to, let's just say, zero out the rate increase this year that actually is in customers' benefit and helps offset some of the other fee and property tax increases that are projected for the budget, have you calculated what number might be available for reinvestment into things like hardening or other things that you all might otherwise want to continue to build on?
So are you asking if we did not have a net reduction to the Austin Energy customer bill, how much money that would generate?
Yes.
Let me see. I believe that would generate about another $40 million, something like that. I believe that would get us to around the $43 million shortfall that we will experience in FY26. Somewhere around there, but we can do the precise math on that because basically right now, the typical Austin Energy residential customer will experience about a $5 decrease in their bill overall. Some costs go up, some costs go down, but that bill is reducing by about $5. So we can back into the number in terms of right now, what I think it would probably generate. Actually, I think my number is a little bit low, but we'll do that math, and it's probably around $50 million.
Okay, yeah, I'll follow up, and if we can work on that, that'd be great, because I'm also curious if you've done any specific studies. I know you've done the below ground and above ground studies that you've shared with us, but if you've come up with a number in relation to those studies for the cost and time to do maybe the most urgent hardening and weatherization infrastructure improvements that we might have benefited from or might continue to benefit from if we have extreme weather events every other year, as we have been in the service area, and if you have a number associated with what that would cost.
Yeah, so part of what we're doing now that we've completed the undergrounding feasibility study and the overhead hardening study, now that will go into our overall comprehensive distribution reliability and resilience plan. And right now, what we have built into our budget, setting that aside because we don't have the numbers for that yet, but we do have our typical resilience investments that we're looking at. So our 5-year CIP plan has $75 million built into it for grid hardening already to continue some of the work that's already underway for our ongoing resilience plan that we've got so far. What you're referring to would be over and above that, but that's where we are in terms of our plans right now.
Okay, thank you. I'll follow up on that then.
And that plan will be coming, once we have that plan, we'll be bringing that plan back to council, likely to be presented at the Austin Energy Utility Oversight Committee. So that will have some numbers, at least in orders of magnitude of what we're talking about in terms of costs for that comprehensive reliability plan.
Okay, I'll look forward to that. Thank you. I have a couple questions for fire. Thank you, Chief. Trying again. Okay, there we go. So I know we've been talking a lot about 3- and 4-person staffing. I'm trying to understand, since it sounds like it would be incredibly relevant, at least to me, to understand how often, based on the numbers that we've got, you all would expect we would be deploying 2-3 people based on the current staffing trends. Have we done any calculation on that? Are we talking about, I'm just trying to generally, is it rare? Is it common? Is it on certain days? Are we talking about 1 in 100 shifts that we might have to go to 3-person, or 1 in 1,000? Do we have any sense of how the frequency of what this change means to the average shift?
If I'm not mistaken, sir, Councilmember Duchin, we hire overtime every day. I'm not sure we hire overtime for all, well, I'm almost positive we don't hire overtime for all of the apparatus. Like I said, we have about 67 units altogether. It's my belief we do not hire overtime for 67 units. However, I have to dig down into the data to get that exact number for you. But I would probably say, before I let Chief Ayers go for his memories, there will be some apparatus that will run with 3. There will be some engine that will run with 3 because we don't have enough staffing. And there will be some engines because we have enough people to staff with 4 will be staffed. So I don't think it will be 100% of our engines that I'm requesting that we will run with 3. But I had to look at that number to get you the exact number.
Thank you.
I'm a pause to see the Chief Ayers have any additional information on that.
Rob Vyers, Chief of Staff with the Austin Fire Department. As it stands today, we pay overtime every day, as the chief said, and that number varies. As a reference, I believe yesterday we paid 26 folks in overtime. We also graduated a cadet class on Friday that put 40 cadets as probationary firefighters out into operations, which left us 60 vacancies where we had 100 before. There are times with the number of folks not able to show up for work that day where we'll pay upwards of 80 people in overtime. And I believe there was a question before, I apologize, I was out of the room, on how overtime is selected. I don't want to take away from council members' time, but if y'all want me to explain that, I'll be happy to do that as well.
That'd be great. I'm happy to donate my time for that question.
All right, thank you. So the way overtime works for the fire department is each morning the battalion chiefs show up and they'll work out their board that shows how many people we have that are present at work that day, and where we're short number of seats. We have 268 assigned seats that have to be filled every single day. When we're short that then creates the overtime list of folks to be selected. The current contract requires us, generally speaking, to use Kelly Day people first. If they're off on Kelly shift and they've signed up for overtime, they've made themselves available for overtime, they get first preference in being selected to fill overtime spots. The idea behind that, to some degree, is that was their scheduled day off. They, in theory, didn't work the 2 days before and are the ones that are most refreshed, as we've talked about mental health items. Where there's still a need for overtime, there's a volunteer list. And if that still hasn't satisfied all the seat needs that we have, it then goes to a second call out. And then if that still hasn't satisfied at all, then it's mandatory overtime. And there are lists that are established for that. That's a brief overview of how overtime is selected.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Looks like I'm about out of time, so I really appreciate those answers. It'd be great to get some very rough understanding of how common it would be for us to deploy a 3-person apparatus. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Alter, followed by Councilmember Valen and the Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pick up right where Councilmember Duchin left off. I do think the practicality, right? We can all talk about all the engines are going to be 3-person or none of the engines are going to be 3-person, but understanding how often do we get to that mandatory spot. If you could share with us those data on that, and then from that, helping us understand that, if this policy had been in place, let's say just over the past month, these are the units that would have had 3 people, and so we can see how often and if there's a geographic concentration, and understand just the practical implication of what would this have looked like in practice. Just, let's say go back a month. I think that would really help us just work through this. I also wanted to understand, you talked about having more people out sick on the weekends. What is the share of calls on the weekends? Do we typically have more calls on weekends or less calls for whether it's fires, crashes, all the things that the fire department does?
The call types varies from day to day. It's been my experience that depending on the season of the year, depending on the day. So on the weekends, I need to look at that data to get you exact. I hate to be guessing
And that's fine. You can come back with the data, but I'm curious, less people driving, so maybe less crashes, less people at work. I don't know how that shakes out, but I'd love to know.
It's just hard to say because you can't schedule a heart attack and you can't schedule a house fire.
Right, and I'm just about, if more people are home on the weekend, do we have more house fires on the weekend? Or since they're home and they accidentally left the stove on, maybe you have less. I would just love to see how the timeout corresponds with our calls to see if those are matching or if there's a disparity there.
I can break it down, the number of calls per days. Just give me about 2 days to get that done. I can make it happen.
No problem.
It won't be hard to get.
I appreciate that. And I don't know if this is a you question or we'll just budget staff generally. What are we currently budgeted for overtime in the base budget for fire? What is the amount budgeted?
She look up the number. I think it's about 13 or 15 million. I think it is, but let me get the exact number.
I think 15 million was roughly the actual spend in 24. It's in the last paragraph of the memo that was distributed last night, I believe. I think their total overtime budget is 10.2 million in the base budget.
There we go. Okay, thank you so much for clarifying. So 10.2, would you say, is a 6.1 million net decrease from 2025, and that's 2025 budgeted, not 2025 spend?
That's correct.
Okay. And so if we were to restore the 8.2 million, that'd put us at 18.4 in their overtime budget. That's correct? And just looking at the chart provided in the memo, in no year except for fiscal year 20, well, in no year were we ever over 18 million. In fiscal year 22, that was our peak. That was at 17.2. Is that correct?
It sounds correct. I just want to point out there's that additional 2 million plus that's associated with non-operations, and that's getting added because of some accounting changes where they used to be booked as expense refunds and now will be booked as revenue, so we had to add the budget. So that's going to move everything up by that $2.something million.
So practically speaking, if we included that 8.2, it would really be 16.3 because of that 2.1 million.
Right, and that tracks roughly with our historical experience and the current absence rates.
Okay. Okay, so then that would leave us only fiscal year 22 being above that amount. All right, that is helpful. So then I wanted to understand, practically speaking as well, if we were to approve this ordinance, but also, as some of the TRE scenarios have contemplated, restore the 8.2 million in overtime costs, what happens with that money? If the chief is having the discretion to have sometimes 3-person staffing, but we approved an additional 8.2 million in overtime, is that just money that is not going to be spent? Or are we going to say, since we have this additional overtime money, chief, even though you have the authority to only have 3 people, we want you to mandatory pull them in so that it's always 4 and 4?
If I understand the question correctly, you're asking me if the ordinance is passed, and then council turn around and increase our budget by the $8.2 million, then it's my understanding, then we will have enough money to staff the personnel with 4 and 4 on the apparatus.
Okay, so in that instance, even though you'd have the managerial discretion to go to 3 because you have the overtime money, you would stay at the 4-person staffing level because you'd have that overtime.
As long as I do not go over my budget.
Okay, very helpful. And let's go in the other direction. Let's say we don't approve the ordinance and the $8.2 million cut remains. What options do you have left to continue the 4 and 4 staffing but still meet that $8.2 million reduction that has currently been allocated to your department?
The option I have, if the $8.2 million is cut from the budget, and I'm mandated to maintain a 4 and 4 staffing model, then I would really have no choice but to either black out fire station or brown out equipment. I don't have enough discretionary funds to meet the need of $8.2 million. I just cannot continue to take staff personnel from inspection, communication, training, and put them back in operation to fill the gap. I just don't have enough resources to fulfill the $8.2 million shortfall.
Okay. All right. Well, I really appreciate that. Just wanted to kind of understand all the different paths we have in front of us and what those lead to. So
it's a whole lot best to keep personnel on apparatus than to shut down fire stations.
Yes, I agree with that. All right. Very much shifting gears. I'm finished with you, Chief, for those questions. Appreciate it. Carrie, can you help me understand throughout the budget, whether every department, but I'm really focused on some of the general fund departments, there are capital, often it's building and improvements, but capital projects that are funded under current revenue. So take APH, for instance. I understand current revenue to just be general fund, which in their pie chart. So does that mean we're funding the buildings and improvements out of general fund dollars?
That is the transfer to the capital rehabilitation fund from the general fund into that fund to identify deferment or to take care of deferred maintenance projects.
And so taking APH, for example, they had, I think, some like HVAC repairs. Is there a reason why we would transfer general fund to the rehabilitation fund to do that instead of utilizing debt service?
So those are some of the projects that are not debt eligible. So we look at what projects are debt eligible and use that COs or whatever the appropriate debt source is. But these are projects that have to be paid for with cash.
Got it. Okay. Well, that answers that question. I also have a question for Austin Water. And this actually gets a little bit into the development space, but I'm wanting to understand. We had the individual here showing us, here's what an ADU, the costs for that. And a significant line there is the tap fee. And my understanding is if I own a property and I want to add an ADU, I have to get an additional tap for the ADU. Is that correct?
That's Shay Rolson, Director of Austin Water. So our policy is that each individual dwelling unit requires its own meter. And that is due to the possibility in the future of those units being sold separately. And then in that case, the new owner of that dwelling unit would be on the same meter as their neighbor.
And that's a change that y'all made recently. Is that?
It is part of the outcome of the homework that allows that future state where those two dwelling units could be owned separately.
Okay. Is there, I'm all for planning for the future, and I think that what you're doing makes, like, it's a rational decision you've made. I'm just trying to think on if we have $75,000 in fees and $20,000 is because of a new water meter, and if I'm, this homeowner and I create this problem for myself with a single tap, right? I just want to add an ADU. Is there an equally rational argument to be said that if I want to sell the ADU later, then I'm going to need to get a new meter. That's an expense I'm going to have to take upon myself, but maybe that doesn't happen, and so this is a way to reduce costs a little bit. And then, it's every little bit here and there. I'm not saying it's all Austin Water, but
We have Joseph Gonzalez, our Chief Financial Officer, may be able to speak to the level of fees that it actually is.
Okay.
But I will say that we don't have a good mechanism when that property is subdivided and sold to enforce installing a meter, its own meter at that time.
Okay.
Good morning, Joseph Gonzalez, Austin Water Chief Financial Officer. For a 5/8 inch meter, which is our smallest meter, the tap fee is approximately $7,400. Certainly there are some other fees, some plan review fees, but I think all told, and I'd have to look and get the exact number, but the cost of an ADU would with its own meter would be serviced by our smallest meter, our 5/8 inch meter, and so I think all told we're looking more in the $10,000 range, but I'd have to validate all of the other fees associated.
Okay. All right. Well, that is a policy choice we had made, and so I'm just, as we look through these fee questions, it's, like I said, I think it's a rational choice, but just balancing everything, we have to decide whether or not where that fits into the overall cost structure. So I appreciate that information. It's very helpful.
I would offer also that we've recently had some escalations within Austin Water for residents of Austin who are dependent on their neighbor's meter, and the legal cost for disputes associated with that situation is significant for the resident of that ADU.
Is there any, and this might be a much longer term question, but is there any kind of middle ground where you say, we don't have to go through this whole legal dispute, you are entitled to get a new meter, your own meter, if you want, but we're not going to force it upon you on the front end?
I think we could have a really robust discussion around those various scenarios and what that could look like. I would offer for consideration that sometimes it's a homeowner that's building an ADU, sometimes it's a developer that's building multiple dwelling units on one property, and those individuals aren't always thinking about the long-term consequences of the choices that they're making on the front end.
Yeah.
And that's part of what you all have charged us to do.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I have just two more questions. One of them for Transportation Public Works about the sidewalk question or conversation we've been having. Here we are. So looking at your chart, you have $34.5 million planned for fiscal year 26. What is your capacity to do more? If we were to add additional money for additional sidewalks, do you have the personnel to do more, or are y'all kind of maxed out in your work?
Thank you for your question, Council Member. I would say our capacity was utilized in the prior year, FY25, when our spend was right at $39.3 million. We forecasted about 80 million back in 2020 over 6 years. So that's around the 30 to 40 million per year.
Okay. That is it on that. And then my last question is related to watershed protection, and Carrie might just be able to answer this question. The 25 million in fiscal year 26, did I hear you correctly that that's primarily just coming from the DUF? That's not bond dollars? I see Director Morales too. So
That is their operating budget, so that will be coming from the DUF.
okay, so none of that fiscal year 26 flood control is coming from bond programs or?
Correct.
Okay. And Director Morales, do you guys kind of keep like a list of whether it's, I assume you probably do as you look to the next bond, but like here are the next projects up when the funding becomes available?
Yes, Councilmember Jorge Morales, Watershed Protection Department. We have a strategic plan that we based on to prioritize our various types of projects, and we do have lists that we go off of. But as you know, that we also react when there's events, and so some of that's incorporated into our operation budget. But going back to your question, as we're going through the bond process right now, we definitely are putting together a list citywide and by district as well.
Very good. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Vela, followed by Mayor Pro Tem.
Director Morales, I got a quick one for you, and then actually I'd like to return to the sub-metering discussion that Councilmember Alter brought up, both with Austin Water and Austin Energy. We added, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Director Morales, but we added an additional creek cleaning crew in the budget. Was it last year's budget or 2 years ago budget? Do you remember that?
That's correct, Councilmember, but that was created a couple of years ago by Councilmember Paige Ellis requested that, and that's actually funded by the Clean Community Fee, and it's housed in the Austin Resource Recovery Department.
Okay, that would be the crews that go through and essentially kind of keep the creeks clear of debris, fallen trees, those kinds of things like that?
Well, their primary task is to keep the creeks clean, but that's one of many components. Our department has operations staff that do that on a daily basis as well. So when we have brush cleanup, we work with contractors, but we also have crews that do that as well. So, and Resource Recovery has a particular crew that responds, and we coordinate with them on that.
Great. How are we feeling about the creek maintenance budget? You know, since we added that additional crew, and I ask this in the context of the obviously the recent floods, and again, there's always going to be recent floods. Like every 5 years, we're going to be talking about the most recent floods. How are we feeling about the condition of the creeks, and in terms of making sure that water is able to flow and that homes aren't flooded?
That's a great question, Councilmember. It's a complex answer, I think, but I'll keep it simple. So the department's mission is to protect from the waterway. So many programs that we have directly address that, obviously operation and maintenance, and we collaborate with other departments. And so there's different impacts to our waterways. As you know, Homeless Strategy Office also has encampment cleanups, and we coordinate on that. So we tackle it in various ways, through contracts, through in-house, and various departments assist with that. But our mission in our department, as storms are coming forward, we go look at hot spots that we identify, and we make sure we keep our waterways clean. After a storm event, we actually go and respond to debris cleanup as well. And depending on the event, be it a storm event or winter event, there's different ways that we tackle that throughout the city.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I appreciate that, and I was happy to see the initiative to add additional resources to the creek maintenance and cleanup. I think that's critically important, and we'll just kind of continue to keep an eye on that. But that's one of those kind of sleeper items that is critically important, that just kind of comes to the surface, unfortunately, in emergency situations. But again, just to the extent that there are needs, I just want to make sure that we're meeting them. Thank you very much. That's all I've got for you. And can I get Austin Water and Austin Energy about the sub-metering in particular? I want to explore this, the costs associated with this, because I think they're substantial. With regard to water, Director, the tap fee was in the $7,400 range?
Yes, Shea, Rolson, Austin Water, that's correct.
And the tap fee, that's not the physical equipment or the line or anything like that. That's just, and again, please correct me if I'm misunderstanding the process. That's just the permitting fee that someone pays to tap into the Austin water system?
Again, Joseph Gonzalez, Austin Water, that's correct. That's the fee to essentially buy into the system.
Okay. And what about, for example, again, let's take a very typical example in the city of Austin. Someone is building an ADU in the back of their house. Do you have a sense of what the cost would be, the additional cost would be in terms of the purchase of the meter, the extension of the water line, the permit fee and all that, what the cost would be to that homeowner who wants to add that additional housing unit in their backyard?
We can get you a more detailed breakdown of what a typical cost would be. It certainly varies depending on the site plan. The additional dwelling unit will need to be connected to the water system either way, whether it has a meter or not. And so it's really the either connection to the existing service line from the main to the property or the connection to the main that is the additional cost for the additional dwelling unit.
And I appreciate that distinction, because what we want to know, again, I think as policymakers, is what's the cost difference between connecting to the existing and connecting to the main. And my sense of it, and again, I don't know this, but just in kind of conversations, that it's about a $20,000 cost difference. Does that sound realistic?
We're going to get you some additional detailed information rather than speculate at this time.
All right. And honestly, same question to Austin Energy. You know, right now, the policy is that you can either do a sub-meter where, you know, you kind of have one wire. And again, please correct me if I'm wrong. This is not my area of expertise. I'm just trying to understand it better. But, you know, you can have one kind of connection to the electric grid and then, you know, go run two houses off of that same connection. Or you can basically have kind of two separate meters with kind of two separate connections for the house. Is that the current policy right now with regard to Austin Energy?
The current policy is if you have two separate residences at different addresses, you need two different service points with two different Austin Energy meters. A lot of that is because for billing purposes, but also if you have another residence and they need access to customer assistance program or any kind of other bill assistance, getting access to those programs, somebody has to be the customer of record for that address. And when if you have multiple addresses under that same service point, it gets complicated there. So current code, if you have two different addresses, you have to have two different Austin Energy points of service and Austin Energy meters.
Okay. And how is that's the current policy, and that has been the current policy for a length of time?
I believe so. We still have some legacy apartment complexes that might be master metered and sub-metered. We might have some apartment complexes where it's all bills included that are actually commercial customers, and those customers aren't paying separate utility bills. But in terms of if you have different residences, different addresses, rather than, a different unit within an apartment complex or something like that, you would need separate meters.
Got it. And then, again, thinking about that same example, if you've got, again, homeowner building an additional unit in the back of their home, if they don't get a new address and they're all working off one meter, versus if they do get a new address and then they're required to install the 2 meters, what's the cost difference to that person that's adding the home in their backyard?
We can look at that. I think part of it involves their electric service panel. On their side, how much can their service panel handle at that point? Do they need a separate service panel on that separate address? What the configuration is, what the certain characteristics are of that electric service. Is another transformer required? Because everything that we do in terms of our fees. A lot of the time we'll call it a line extension fee, but really what it is dollar for dollar. If you need a new transformer for your new residence, or if you need a new pole installed, that's at cost. So each year in the budget process, we're going to look at all of our costs and in terms of our fees to make sure we're recovering 100% of the cost. So those are set at cost. If they weren't set at cost, the rest of our customers would be subsidizing that through electric rates, because we would have to recover those costs from somewhere. And so by having that 100% cost recovery policy that the city has had for quite some time, it allows us to avoid rate increases that would subsidize new development.
And so I want to follow up on that, but what would be the, to use the tap fee for Austin Energy? Again, I don't know what you would call it exactly, but with the fee to
line extension fee.
Yeah. What is that?
It's set at cost, so it's going to be different. If we need to if we need to install multiple new poles to get to you and a new transformer, if you have if you have a vacant lot, for example, with 3 houses that are currently being served by a transformer, maybe the existing infrastructure doesn't need to be upgraded at all, and you would just need to install your electrical equipment and pay for the meter. So it's going to vary, but it's always going to be set at cost.
Is there a permit fee attached with that, line extension request?
The permits would be separate from this. Would be costs we would be collecting through the design process, where we're designing how we're going to get power to that customer, and then the infrastructure that's required to get it there. And then what we recently looked at was the typical fees that would be associated with new development, for example, infill development, and what the increases would be year over year for those kinds of fees that you're talking about for reviews, for site plan. For Austin Energy, that looks like about an increase of $175 year over year.
But again, do we know what the fee is, the permit fee, not the actual physical cost of Austin Energy to, put the new pole and the new wires and all that kind of stuff like that, but the permitting fee for requesting a new basically service address, right?
Right.
Is that a DSD question?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that would be a DSD question.
Okay. I'll follow up on that with DSD in just a second. But with regard to the new transformers, one of the things, again, these are just anecdotes that we hear from different folks in the process, but when someone is putting in a new building, again, this is infill development largely that we're talking about. Greenfield development is a totally separate, obviously they have to install the infrastructure, so that's a completely and totally different situation. But there's this kind of game of roulette, or honestly musical chairs would probably be the better analogy, where someone comes in and let's say there's 12 houses on the block, all connected to a transformer, and you come in and you're going to build like the 13th house on the block, but the transformer can't handle that capacity. Your Austin Energy would need to upgrade that capacity. That last person that kind of comes onto that block is then required to upgrade the transformer so as to be able to supply the proper electricity to the entire kind of service area of that transformer. Is that the current kind of process that we follow?
Yes, but for this addition, that investment wouldn't be required. So that cost has to be borne by somebody, and we can't go back to the others who are, the existing customers and collect the cost from them. So, but for that, in your example, 13th customer coming online, that would not be an investment that in the system that would have to be made, and the current policy is for full cost recovery.
And so, in that scenario, what would full cost recovery look like? Again, for a small scale infill development where someone is the straw that breaks the camel's back, and you're like, we got to upgrade the entire kind of connection. What kind of costs are we talking about for that last person?
It's really typically a transformer in your typical residential area can serve 4 customers. You typically see it on a pole at the front of the street, and then you would see the 4 service drops going down to the 4 homes immediately proximate to that pole. In certain cases, if we need to upgrade or add another transformer to get, let's say they're building 2 houses in the back of one of those 4, now we have 6 that we can't feed off of that one transformer. So we'd either need to go to a second 25 kVA transformer or add a 50, replace it with a 50. And so that's typically what it looks like, and we'd be talking about a cost of $2,500, something like that.
For the transformer?
Correct.
That's not what I understand from the anecdotes that I've heard have been much higher than that. Would that include the transformer and kind of the additional work and line that would be required? Because again, the what I would hear it would be more in line kind of with the $20,000 that cost of the new water meter for a house. Do you have any sense of that?
That might be referring to the all-in cost. So we can look at specific examples, but ultimately they're going to need not just the transformer. They're going to need to go through the design process. There may be some limitations on how to get service to that customer. There may be challenges in terms of routing. They could be in an area that's underground, so there may be underground service. It's always going to be set at cost, and those costs are going to vary substantially from project to project.
So I'd really like to understand better on that, because I want to make sure we're pushing in the same direction here. We have taken a lot of steps to try and make infill housing more affordable, and when we add a bunch of infrastructure costs and permitting costs and whatnot onto those individual properties, I just feel like we're erasing a lot of the gains that we've recently made in terms of bringing down the cost of housing. So, for example, on the sub-metering, I can't support the requirement of sub-metering for every single water. Again, I understand that there may be situations down the road when someone does a 3-unit home project on a property and later on is going to sell. But I mean, folks can work that out. There are condo agreements. That's how they've been doing it recently, where there's an agreement to share all of the fees. There are, access agreements that people have where they have a shared driveway between the, 2 properties along the property line. Again, these are not kind of new problems in real estate development. We've been dealing with these in relatively reasonable ways for a long, long time. So that's about it. I got to thank all the other council members for answering the questions, because I think they hit every question that I had, so I'll stop it there.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember. Mayor Pro Tem, and then I'll follow myself, and then I only have one person that has signed up for a second round of questions. If anybody wants to do that, let me know. Mayor Pro Tem, you have the floor.
Thank you. This question is for Director Badawi with the airport. Colleagues, I wanted to highlight for you an area of interest for our office in exploring and ensuring that we're able to deliver on our airport expansion program. One key area that we've honed in on is around fees on private aircraft and corporate jets, and taking a look at how are we assessing fees on private aircraft and seeing that there is an opportunity there for us to explore and adding new revenue to our airport, as well as ensuring that we're being equitable in how we assess fees throughout the airport. So Director Badawi, can you please speak to the proposal around fees and considerations that you and your team are making in the weeks ahead?
Good morning, Ghislaine Badawi, Aviation. Thank you, Council Member, for the question regarding the general aviation fees. We're planning a comprehensive review of all the general aviation fees. It's included in our FY26 plan. Our highest priority has been focused on negotiations with the airlines and cargo airlines to secure the funding for our expansion program. Currently, we are charging general aviation fees, but I would like to just clarify all the fees that we collect from landing fees or general aviation fees, they go to what we call a cost center. So all our revenue is broken down to cost centers. We have airfield cost center, terminal cost center, the landside cost center, and the apron cost center. So all the fees generated from landing fees or the fuel flowage fees will go to offset that cost center. We cannot use them to fund the expansion program. So any additional general aviation fees that we generate, we cannot use them, for example, to fund the roadways or to fund the garage. Through the new lease and use agreement, our airlines will be investing billions of dollars in funding the expansion. And that's how we will be funding the expansion. But it's in our work plan. We will do the benchmarking and the review and come back to council with the results.
Thank you, Director Badawi. And for our city attorney, I would like to have a specialized session on this portion of fees revenues generated from our airport and our ability to assess them and where that may go as part of the airport expansion program. But I just want to circle back to the fees that our airport is considering, and I had hoped that we would have had a dedicated slide or a session just talking about airport operations and our airport budget in general. But since we have you here, one area that is also of interest to me and my team is acknowledging that we have some really high volume, high traffic events in our city, Formula One, South by Southwest, ACL. With that activity, we see an increased amount of private jets coming in and out of Austin Airport. From the research we've done, we see that other municipalities are able to do surcharges for these high volume events and assess an additional charge during those weekends. That is another area that we are exploring.
Yes, we'll be looking into all the fees holistically, all the general aviation fees, and we'll benchmark with other airports. We charged special fees in the past, for example, for events like Formula One.
Very good. So, colleagues, just wanted to daylight as an area of interest. I will be bringing forward a budget rider related to airport fees for consideration of the full dais. And then last question for you, Director Badawi. On the enhancements list, there was an item for the airport on funding a permanent ramp control system, and I just wanted you to speak to that.
Yes, that's an operational enhancement. We brought a contract to council for $45 million to implement and install the permanent solution. Currently, we are managing ramp control using just existing cameras at the airport. This solution will design, construct, and install specialized cameras for ramp control, and this is an enhancement to the safety and operation of our ramp.
And it's an enhancement that is funded and is not needing additional funding at
Correct.
this time. Okay, just wanted to flag that for everyone's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
No further questions.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. No. I think we're all done. I've got a couple of questions, and Mr. Gray, you might want to come down and just be part of this, but I'm not sure. Ms. Lang, the other day, Mr. Gray got a question about where in the alternatives that you all had provided through the manager's office had provided, where the plan that the homeless strategy office had put forward, where that plan, and the way he answered it is he said it became actualized at 5 cents. So you've offered a number of alternatives, 1 cent, 2 cent, 3 cent, 4 cent, 5 cent, and on. And he was asked a question by the Mayor Pro Tem, and his answer was that the full plan becomes actualized at 5 cents. And I want to be clear on the reason that is, and that is because you can actualize that plan at a lower number. It's just that in the alternatives you've provided things other than just the homeless strategy office plan, right?
Yes, correct.
So the homeless strategy office plan becomes actualized at your 5 cent scenario because it's about a little over $45 million item, and that's where the full $45 million gets played out, is at the 5 cent alternative, right?
Correct.
So if we wanted to look at it at a different alternative, say a lower alternative, at $45 million, and since each penny counts, gets us about $21.6 million, you could almost fully actualize that plan at 2 cents, but it would leave no opportunity for other items. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
All right, so if we wanted to, as a council, look at fully actualizing David Gray, the HSO's plan not fully actualizing David Gray. I realize that question sounded weird as it came out of my mouth. We'll talk about that another time. But if we wanted to fully actualize the plan that he has worked on, has presented to a joint committee of the public health and audit and finance and to the whole council, if we wanted to at 3 cents, we could put that into the 3-cent plan, and that would still leave about a penny available for other things, correct?
Yes.
And one of the ways to make that penny go further for services is right now you've put about a penny aside for reserves. Is that right?
Correct.
All right, so if we wanted to make that penny go further as it applies to services as opposed to something like reserves, we could utilize that penny for those services even at 3 cents instead of reserves.
You could, however, in addressing the reserves, we are also addressing the existing deficit that we're seeing in our base rate.
No, I understand what you're attempting to do with the way you have done those alternatives. I'm just pointing out that another use of that penny could be for other services, and that would be one of the, if that's what we decided we wanted to do. And my understanding is that would put the reserves at around 15.8%. Is that correct? If we were to reduce the amount that would go into reserves. Or you may not know that. I may have done the math on that. That may be my math and not yours.
I think 15.8% is the reserve level in the proposed budget. So if you levied additional tax and made no change to the reserves, that's where you'd end up.
That's okay. That's what I thought. Okay, very good. Thank you. My questions have been answered with regard to AFD, and the Housing Trust Fund was also brought up. I was going to bring those up as items as well. So with that, thank you. I'll now turn to Councilmember Lane. We'll start the second round of this.
Thank you. I've just got a couple follow-up questions in new areas. Austin Energy. Thank you. So one of the significant line item changes that I saw was an expenditure of $500,000 for consulting services to support the implementation of resource generation and climate protection plan. Can you describe what deliverables we're expecting to receive from this $500,000?
I'm going to ask Austin Energy Chief Operating Officer Lisa Martin to come up and respond to that. She might be more familiar with the details.
Well, she's felt like she's been left out.
She has. She has.
So.
Good morning, Councilmember. Lisa Martin, Austin Energy Chief Operating Officer. So that line item, as you know, the Resource Generation and Climate Protection Plan that was adopted last December has a lot of different components to it. And so that line item is for kind of any one of those that might need some additional services to make sure that we're not caught off guard, if you will. The ones that I'm thinking of most readily in the next fiscal year would be the all resource RFP. Now that we have some battery storage underway, we'll need to do an all resource RFP to see what can we do to get some additional local generation and to be able to analyze the different alternatives between solar offers, battery offers, and new, more efficient peaker offers.
Just a follow-up question. Austin Energy is innovative, runs amazing programs in many ways. Many of you have heard me speak about also the importance of reliability, resilience in my district and in many other districts around the city. Have you looked at, can you provide any information now or as follow-up about the trend line on our spending on reliability and resilience versus some of the other innovative programs that we do? Are we increasing that as a percentage of our budget or decreasing? Or
Stuart Riley, Interim General Manager. So this year, year over year from last year, we are not increasing that. We do still have $10 million dedicated to resilience projects. That would be some of the overhead hardening type of work. But in addition to that, we've been increasing our vegetation management spend. We have other initiatives that aren't specific to, and that's over $30 million a year on vegetation management. So we have a lot of projects and initiatives underway that move the needle on it that aren't necessarily just in that bucket of overhead hardening resilience projects, which is that $10 million. But during the 5-year CIP plan, that is going up. So eventually that's why I cited earlier the $75 million over the 5-year period. So that is going to be going up. And then we anticipate it'll go up more after we've got our comprehensive resilience plan.
Okay. So as we've discussed, the vegetation trimming, vegetation management hasn't made it around to all parts of the city since Uri. And we have helped together to resolve some of the issues that impact schools. But it's part of the reason why I'm asking what the trend is, because the amount of time it's taking us to get through some of these reliability and resilience projects, I just want to ensure that we're providing the basic level of service appropriately before spending more on more innovative things.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. And it is one of the I guess one of the bottlenecks that we've had in terms of not being able to make more progress more quickly on vegetation management is our contractors' limited availability of finding qualified tree trimmers who can trim around power lines. And so we've been working with those vendors to help them create job training programs and recruit more employees, and really taking more of a hands-on approach with them to try to get the staffing levels up to where we would like, so that we can be making more progress on that. And we will continue making the full cycle.
That's great info. I have some ideas in relation to what you just said that I'll share later. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank Councilmember Alter and Vela for the sub-metering discussion. As a former multifamily housing specialist in the Austin market for a decade, I will say that in my experience, it's far more common to see not sub-metered when it's water and wastewater than electricity. I thought you gave a great explanation of how that becomes necessary at addressing when there are separate addresses. But I also, and I don't know if Shay will want to say anything else after I make this comment, but I also think that, one, it's more common to see not sub-metered units. And you mentioned as one of the leading reasons why you would require a tap fee is because if in the future this is sold separately, and I just want to put out there for discussion where y'all who have been deeply engaged can hear, and we know that this is at play, perhaps we could consider a trigger for it that relates to whether it's legally possible to sell as separate units, because the subdivision process is costly, developing a condo regime is costly. Those are the two mechanisms by which they could be sold separately. And if the property owner hasn't contemplated that, to add on water tap fees for something that legally can't happen could be maybe not where we want to add fees. And as a final note, where we do tend to see not sub-metering of water and wastewater is in more affordable housing types, as this is one.
We do have exception. Thank you, Councilmember Shay Rolson, Austin Water. We do have an exception protocol in place that we look at individual scenarios on a case-by-case basis. And so, to your point, if it's not possible to subdivide it in the future, that would be something that we would look at. I will also say, as it relates to the overall cost, particularly in infill development, where the new development will have more water fixtures, more people living there, a higher level of water use. The existing infrastructure on the private side, the public side service line, the private side service line, the existing meter is likely undersized to serve that new development. And so that cost is needed regardless of whether we place a new meter. And so the actual meter cost is a limited addition to the overall cost of infill development when it comes to if you're going to have a bunch more bathrooms, another kitchen or two, then you will need to upsize the service line regardless of whether or not you need a separate meter. Okay. So we do review these applications on a case-by-case basis to make sure that What is installed is no more and no less than what's required to serve that new development.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Transportation and Public Works. We have a question on sidewalks. So those were some, I'm just going to lay it out while you're walking up. Those were some stunning figures of a goal of 80% functionally acceptable sidewalks. We started 3 years ago at 25% of that goal. We're now at 45 to 50. That means there's a lot that hasn't been constructed yet. I am looking at the detailed spending plan, and I noticed that in our capital spending, we are providing for building out sidewalks that were planned many years ago, before a lot of new growth that's already on the ground in apartments is in place, and needs have changed. So I'm wondering if the way that we're looking at funding this is our next steps, which would put out into the future with the next bond. But we know that there's such a shortfall, and we know there's no guarantee that a bond will pass, nor a TRE, nor anything necessarily. But the bond would be the one that comes up last. So I am wondering why in the TRE scenarios we're not seeing a proposal that would help us with that gap, that funding gap in both time and money.
Thank you, Councilmember. Yeah, historically, we've utilized referendums to pay for capital and new construction, and our operating budget to address the needed deferred maintenance and major repairs. We do some new construction, like with fee and lieu related to development, and I named the grants also, but we've not historically paid as we go capital out of our annual operating budget, just because the repair needs are also a demand on that operating budget.
Absolutely demand. We hear in almost every meeting about needs, just thinking of Parmer, all the way from Dessaw in Northeast Austin to the far boundary and to Cedar Park. I am just wondering if we may want to consider more allocation that's certain for construction of sidewalks. Okay. We had a speaker who very well summarized all the different ways that this relates to Austin's goals, from equity to transportation to quality of life and spending time with families.
Right. Certainly something that we can explore.
Okay.
For a little bit of context on our annual operating budget, for FY26, we have 8.4 proposed for maintenance. That represents a threefold increase since 2020 funding, and an 8-time increase since 2016, when the original major mobility referendum was passed for new sidewalks in our sidewalk network. So we have been increasing over time, but of course balancing that with all the other needs in our mobility network ongoing.
And with our new financial reality, where we're constrained on revenue in certain ways, we have to go to election for the TRE and then the bond, I am opening that it may be a time to look at building in that progress a little more deliberatively before the bonds. So, thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for TPW. I have a comment that I'd like to make about fire staffing. I don't think that'll need you, but just in case. We all here care about the safety and security of our constituents, our firefighters. And I just want to really recognize that a lot of time and energy went into identifying, before I ever arrived here, a fire leadership team that has significant experience. And I think it's important for me to rely on what they're telling me is the mechanism available that would have the least cost to safety and delivery of these fire services and the management tools that they need. And it is quite striking that you have shared information with us about how you have fewer tools as a manager than many peer cities. And so I want to thank you for your statement on that matter. I guess I do have a question, so I'm glad you came forward. I'm thinking of Councilmember Siegel's questions and comments relating to the upcoming contract negotiations. And I heard you, Chief Baker, say very clearly that what you're looking for is an action by council on policy that will give you back a tool in your tool belt for this. Let's say that council does not act on that request, and then we are in the budget negotiations. To me, from what I understand of the process, what that would mean is we would have shifted from the ability to control overtime to we would be looking at cost savings for base salary or raises over the life of that contract if we wanted to find the savings another way. Am I missing something, or is there another way that we could potentially handle these issues through the negotiations?
Councilmember Lane, I'm not sure I'm following your question, but since it's a CBA-related question, with the permission of the council, I would prefer that question to the Labor Relations Officer, Ms. Roxanne, to handle that.
Okay.
Before we do that, Councilmember.
That's my last question.
Well, no, I'm not worried about time right now. What I'm worried about is having a discussion about collective bargaining and strategy related to collective bargaining and what might go into a collective bargaining strategy on the dais.
Okay, I thank you.
So if you
And
don't
I'll tie it
mind,
up
I'm going
differently.
to ask
Yes.
that that's,
Given your
that
comment,
maybe you withdraw your question so we don't get into that.
I'm happy to revise,
Good.
and I appreciate that.
Sure.
And I thank you.
And that will allow us to end as well. So.
Well, in that case, there was a double whammy, so
Yes.
good.
So I want to thank you for your clear statements of what your request is of this council, and note that we are moving through a much longer process, and hope that we give the tools that are needed and will help us all.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Vela.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple of follow-up questions for DSD, actually. And with regard to the water usage and the need to sub-meter, I mean, when I think about it, per capita water usage has gone down substantially. I mean, I think about my neighborhood. It was built in the 1950s, with water infrastructure in the 1950s, much higher family sizes, much higher water usage. I'm wondering, where the need is there. And I would also because my understanding is that most ADUs are on one taps. Most of the ADUs the city has built since we legalized them in that 2016. I would also just kind of wonder if if we've been seeing infrastructure problems for those homes that are going from single family to multifamily, 2 units or something like that. If we've seen problems within, single tap ADU residences.
Thank you, Councilmember. Again, Shay Rolson, Austin Water. I will get you better than anecdotal evidence of whether or not we're seeing problems with existing ADUs. But one of the things that we do over in the course of our business is go out and run flow tests on the older infrastructure to determine if it can adequately serve the existing or proposed, homes that would come off of that existing service line. Infrastructure that was built 60 years ago was built to different standards, different service level standards than we have today. Infrastructure itself ages over time and becomes less reliable and needs to be replaced. And so when you have infill development in these areas that were built to different standards over many years ago and have aged over time, then you do see infrastructure that needs to be replaced. And certainly, while per capita water use has gone down, when we bring in additional dwelling units on an existing lot, we do see overall water usage for that lot go up.
Of course.
And so that's our design standards today are designed to provide the service level that our customers expect and that meet industry standards. And that does require upgrading infrastructure, again, regardless of whether or not we implement a second meter. And we do have exceptions for when a second meter is required, and that is related to water fixture counts and whether or not the second dwelling unit has a kitchen and other factors that we look at on a case-by-case basis with the applicant.
So, and I appreciate that. In my experience as an attorney, exceptions are difficult. More paperwork, more time, more effort. I think clear and simple rules are probably better than waivers and exceptions.
We do strive for clear and transparent, and we strive for moving through that process as quickly as we can. I would say that because these developments are so variable, every site is different. We strive to have rules that are clear and accessible and easy to understand. We also want to provide applicants the flexibility to demonstrate to us that their particular situation, has its own particular needs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the comments.
Thank you.
Director, I know. Do we know what the DSD permit for the electrical drop is? The discussion that I was having with.
Keith Mars, Development Services Department. Yes, we do. So a standalone permit fee. Let me just give you a summary number. Roughly about $300 for the electrical service application, and then additional connection fees from Austin Energy.
Okay, so $300 from DSD plus whatever
Yes, sir.
Energy is charging. Okay, got it. With regard, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the budget situation that DSD is under. Have we? What has the deficit? Because I know y'all have been pulling from your reserves for, I believe, the last year or the last 2 years, and I was just wondering what those amounts were that we had to pull from the DSD reserves.
Bear with us just a minute, Councilmember.
No problem. And as Ms. Lang is finding that, I also wanted to ask, because it's, I know you mentioned that in the presentation that some of the fees have been lowered, others have been raised. Do we have a few questions? Do we have a kind of an apples to apples comparison? Again, I'm thinking about the home initiative just because this is a recent effort of this council. What would the fees look like pre the current increases, and what would the fees look like post current increases, so we could have kind of that apples to apples comparison of someone that is going to do 2 or 3 single family homes on a project? I don't know if y'all have that number, but it would be great to for our purposes to see something like that.
Councilmember, I have a great example for you. So the infill ordinance from earlier this year, also known as Site Plan Light Part 2, and that is where council focused on 5 to 16 units and reduce the regulatory requirements while still safeguarding public interest, public safety, but streamlined regulations, right-sized regulations. DSD then took that action and said, okay, these are no longer the reviews that are required, or these are the review times that are going to be shortened by no longer having these regulations. Those inputs went into how we determine cost of service. So from that change alone, we are looking at 5 to 16 unit site plan all-in cost for DSD, so that you're permitting in your inspections, going from $20,700 to $15,600. So roughly a $5,000 decrease in the permitting fees as a result of policy changes.
From the site plan light perspective.
That's correct. Also, as I mentioned earlier, that's also a reflection of DSD doing all we can to control the cost inputs.
Yeah, appreciate that very much. I would love to get that number also for your 1, 2, and 3 house combination, which is now our kind of by right, ready to go. And honestly, we're seeing quite a number of home developments go up. And again, I very much appreciate that calculation. If we could also get the same number for the home, those properties that are home type developments. And then the other thing that I would be very curious about is how are fees compared to other Texas cities? And I think that's always, again, we hear these anecdotes about Austin has such high fees. I don't know that. I want to get out of anecdotes and I want to get some data because I think that's very important. To the extent that our fees are much higher than our peer Texas cities, that's a concern. To the extent that we're more in line with them, then that gives me a lot more comfort moving forward. So,
Councilmember, we anticipate that question and are working that with our peers around the state.
Great. Thank you very much, and that's all I had.
Thank you, Councilmember Vela.
Sorry, Councilmember, just your earlier question about DSDs dipping into reserves. They operated at a $21 million deficit in FY24, and their FY25 estimate is to be in a $10.6 million deficit. So that's a combined $31.7 million dip into the reserves over 2 years.
Great. And are there any reserves left?
There are not estimated to be any reserves left as of the close of this fiscal year.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Vela.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I had a clarification for your earlier question.
I was told that you did.
Okay. Yeah, I mentioned levying a tax, but presumably you then appropriate those dollars. And if you did that while the reserve balances stay the same, the percentage of ongoing expenditures that balance represents would decline. Sure. And so it would be about $65 million for 3 pennies. If you appropriated that all and changed nothing else, you'd be down to a 15.1% reserve level.
Okay. And we were talking that the base budget is 15.77, right?
That's correct.
Good deal. All right. Thank you. Question on behalf of the council, with the number of questions that have been asked today, primarily I would say of fire and water with regard to specific issues and questions that have come up. And I'll ask the financial staff too, what would be the preference? Do you want council members that had questions to put those up on the Q&A, or can we rely on y'all just answering the questions and putting those up in the Q&A in that way? What's the best way to get that out there?
Staff will debrief and verify the questions that were not answered, and then respond to them through Q&A.
Everybody, any objection to that? I think that's good. That's why I wanted to ask that question. All right.